bienvenidos. Muchas gracias por venir a acompañarnos esta tarde en el museo. Es una tarde muy especial para nosotros porque nos convoca un tema crucial en el trabajo del Museo del Oro desde su creación, que es el tema de la conservación de las colecciones. Tendremos la conferencia de la doctora Donna Cook. No estuvimos preparados, lecciones que dejó el huracán Katrina sobre el plan de salvamento y la gestión de riesgos de colecciones en bibliotecas o museos. Ella nos contará sobre las lecciones aprendidas durante esta trágica experiencia en New Orleans, específicamente en la Universidad de Tulane, donde ella trabaja, en el huracán de 2005, que inundó las bibliotecas de la universidad. Quisimos invitar a Donna a esta charla para aprender de ella y sobre esta experiencia, sobre estas lecciones y sobre planes de salvamento. Este es un tema en el que viene trabajando pues, la mesa de conservación. Estamos haciendo unos planes de salvamento para todas las colecciones del banco, pero en el que en Colombia prácticamente no existe ningún desarrollo en estos temas. Donna Capel Cook es directora de la División de Servicios Técnicos de la Biblioteca de la Universidad de Tulane en New Orleans, donde supervisa las adquisiciones, catalogación, recursos electrónicos y conservación. Trabajó estrechamente con el equipo de recuperación luego del huracán Katrina y forma parte del equipo de respuesta a emergencias. Tiene un máster en bibliotecología y un MA en Historia Americana de la Universidad de Indiana.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you Tulane's main library, to share with you how Tulane's main library recovered after the levees broke on August 29, 2005, and the basements of the library and the buildings housing our special collections flooded. We learned so much from this experience, and I appreciate that you asked me to share it with you. And I hope that you can learn something from our experience. In addition to my day job, because there was no one else to do my day job, I was, as director of the main library's technical services, I was also the co-project manager for the post-salvage recovery and restoration. I've spent 10 years dealing with the whole post-Katrina mess almost every day. At times, it was overwhelming, and certainly it was exhausting. But as someone said to me at lunch, we are a very resilient bunch in New Orleans. This is a cartoon that comes into my email every day, and this happened to be Monday morning's cartoon, and I thought it was appropriate. This is a comic strip called Unshelved. Is anyone familiar with this cartoon? It's a library. It's a strip drawn by two librarians, and it seemed very appropriate since my topic today discusses Tulane's disaster plan. The setting here is a public library in a mall. Dewey, the character with the bright yellow hair, is named for Melville Dewey and is a reference librarian. And in this strip, the library director calls her staff together and says, "We need to come up with a disaster preparedness plan." And Dewey, who is holding the box that reads, "In case of emergency, tell the director, way ahead of you." The director looks in his box and says to Dewey, "I see 3 pounds of coffee and a bag of Cheetos." Dewey, who consumes numerous cups of coffee in the strips, responds, "You're right, it needs more coffee." It was probably Colombian coffee. The overview of my talk today will start with a brief background on New Orleans, Tulane University, and the library buildings affected by the flooding. What happened in August 29, 2005, and the salvage, how we dealt with the damaged collections, how we recovered, and then by looking at Tulane's the library's 2004 disaster plan and today's plan, and what we learned and the changes we made to our plan. This is a map of New Orleans. Tulane University is located in New Orleans, Louisiana. The red line on this map shows roughly the city limits, and you can see how all the water that surrounds it. The Gulf of Mexico is about 100 miles south, and then here, this is called Lake Pontchartrain, and then there's Lake Bourne over here, and then this is the Mississippi River that comes up here through New Orleans. So the city is actually protected from flooding by natural ridges and man-made levees. The man-made levees were built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers back in the 1960s. New Orleans is the 49th largest city in the United States with a population in the metropolitan area of 1.26 million people. It is the 6th largest port in the United States, and I thought I'd throw this in, and the 2nd largest U.S. port for the import of coffee, and a lot of that coffee comes from Colombia. Tourism is a major industry in the city, and people from all over the world come to visit here. And this is why when New Orleans flooded in 2005, it was an international news event. This is where Tulane is located. I have a little, there we go, a little star. Hello. Oops, there, right here. The climate in New Orleans is subtropical. So in the summer, the temperature and humidity is similar to, for your purposes, Cartagena. The climate will play a factor in our disaster. Tulane University is located in uptown New Orleans. It was founded in 1834 as the Medical College of Louisiana. It was renamed Tulane University 50 years later in honor of Paul Tulane, an American philanthropist who donated funds to improve higher education in New Orleans. Today, Tulane University is a private institution with about 14,000 students and is a major research university. The south part of campus is located on St. Charles, and the streetcar passes in front of this building, this one here. Tulane is important to New Orleans because it is one of the city's largest employers. After Hurricane Katrina, it was the largest employer in the city for several years. Tulane's campus is divided, with the medical school downtown near the French Quarter and the uptown campus. This map shows the uptown campus. Here is St. Charles, right here, where the streetcar goes. St. Charles is considered to be the front of the uptown campus. The collections flooded after the levees broke will be located in Howard-Tilton Memorial Library, which is there, and the Joseph Merrick Jones Hall, there. There are other libraries at Tulane, but they were not damaged. Some background on the library. The Howard-Tilton Memorial Library is the main library for Tulane. The library offers print and electronic resources, CDs and DVDs, as well as streaming video and microforms to its users. This building also includes our Latin American library on the 4th floor. The director of this library wants me to assure you there was no damage to the LAL print collection after Katrina. Howard-Tilton opened in 1969 and with 4 floors and a basement. This is how it looked in August of 2005. All the floors, including the basement, contain circulating collections. In the basement were the Maxwell Music Library, the media collection, federal government documents, microforms, and other materials in storage rooms. This basement is about 40,000 square feet. I'm sorry, I don't know what that might be metrically. Many find it hard to believe that a city surrounded by water like New Orleans is would have buildings with basements, and that those basements would contain important collections. So across the parking lot from Howard-Tilton is Jones Hall, which houses the special collections offices on floors 2 and 3. The rest of the building is occupied by academic offices. There is 39,000 linear feet of archival materials and artifacts in this building. Jones Hall was built in 1939 with the main library until Howard-Tilton opened. This building also had a basement, and in 2005, this basement housed unprocessed manuscript collections belonging to the Louisiana Research Collection. The basement is about 6,000 square feet. So what happened on August 29th, 2005? This picture of the hurricane's approach to New Orleans is something that still gives many of us chills. It was the storm of all storms. New Orleanians watched anxiously as Hurricane Katrina crossed Florida and entered into the Gulf. Predictions of where the hurricane would go varied widely. As it entered the southern U.S. coast as a Category 5 hurricane, the U.S. National Hurricane Center warned that the storm surge from Katrina could overtop some of the levees protecting the city. On August 29, 2005, the eye of the hurricane reached the Louisiana coastline around 7 a.m. Wind speeds up to 130 miles per hour, which I think is about 209 kilometers per hour, were clocked in New Orleans, and the entire city's electricity was knocked out, the entire city. Cell phone service was knocked out. Trees fell down. I mean, this was a very strong wind. Hurricane winds, they circle counterclockwise, and this is going to play a factor in the flooding that's going to occur. The water surge from the storm pressed on those U.S. Army Corps of Engineers man-made levee walls, and breaks began around 8 a.m. Monday morning, August 29th. I must be bumping this, I apologize. Okay, this map shows where the breaks and the water levee levels are. I don't know if you can see these yellow stars, like right here, and here, and here, here. Those are where the breaks are. The arrows are going to show you how the water surge came in. So they came, when I talked about the counterclockwise of the water, that's why the winds, and that's why the water then came from the north and went south because of those winds. The darker the colors on this map, and this indicates the deeper the water. Areas in green and blue reflect the lowest water levels. Water poured into the city from the breaks and caused billions of dollars of damage. And this is where Howard-Tilton and Jones Hall are located, down here. There we go, right here. The water level there reached about 2 feet around the buildings. Nowhere in the United States was a major city so devastated like New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Never before had a major city been completely shut down. All right, referring back to the campus map, I'm going to add these blue arrows to show you direction of the water as it flowed into campus. The floodwaters extended across the campus to the library buildings because it took a while. Those are the library buildings, because it took a while for the waters to reach campus. Early reports noted minimal damage to the campus and no water. These reports were wrong. This is a picture of looking towards Jones Hall on a typical day. This is Jones Hall here. That's a typical day. Howard-Tilton is going to be out of the picture to the right. The blue arrow, oops, wrong thing. There we go. The blue arrow indicates direction of the water flow from the levee breaks as it crossed the campus. This is the same area after Katrina. Here's Jones Hall. This is what I just showed you. This is Howard-Tilton. Howard-Tilton and Jones Hall are on a street called Ferret Street. The steps and ledge here on the right, this is Howard-Tilton, and this is the street on a normal day. The same view after the floodwaters reached campus. After the storm passed, the Assistant Dean for Special Collections, Bill Maneri, who's now retired, who rode out the hurricane in his home nearby, waded through the floodwaters to check the buildings. This first responder discovered the flooded basements. For weeks after the storm passed, federal authorities worked to seal up the levee breaks around the city and pump the water out. Once the floodwaters were gone, recovery efforts on Tulane's campus could begin. Until then, the library materials sat in water. Now we're talking weeks. We had a few other problems after the water was pumped out of the city. Due to the post-storm flooding and conditions, the mayor called for a full evacuation of the city. People evacuated before the storm because with a hurricane you do have some notice that it's going to come and hit close to you, so you evacuate, you leave, and then those who didn't then left after he called for an evacuation. We also had a problem getting into the city afterwards because it was restricted. Parts of the city were still flooded. Once Tulane had been pumped out, because we were at the end of the flooding, once we could get to that, you had problems getting into the city. It required a special permit, so you came in either with a law enforcement officer in his SUV or truck, and you could come in from the west, or you came in from the southwest. The hurricane had destroyed all the roads and bridges to the east of the city, including this. This is a bridge across Lake Pontchartrain, and this was gone. It had been totally destroyed in the hurricane by the water. The city itself was a mess. Electrical wires were down. Trees and other debris clogged the streets. Means of communication, like cell phones and landline telephones, were out, as well as the internet. The city was under a dusk to dawn curfew, which meant first responders could not be in the city after dark. So whatever work you had done, you had to stop and leave. They came around and chased you out. And just as the recovery efforts could begin, another hurricane swept in, Hurricane Rita. And although it made landfall west of New Orleans on September 24th, 2005, wind and rain from the storm shut down the city. So, we know that there are flooded collections in 2 buildings. Now what do? I'd like to quickly take a look with you at what the disaster plan in 2005 says. From the introduction to the disaster plan in 2004, it states that the plan's primary purpose is to document an orderly preparation and response strategy to any fire or waterborne disaster. All right, we have a waterborne disaster. Oops, I did it again. Okay. The introduction goes on to state that this plan has been designed for minor emergencies involving 500 to 1,000 items or less. The plan includes basic instructions on how to save wet items and how to evacuate the building in case of fire. Our disaster has now exceeded the library's disaster plan minor emergency definition. This disaster is much, much greater than the 500 to 1,000 items. Then the plan says, if it is determined that the library can handle the situation, the disaster response team should be called. The disaster response team was a group of library employees who would assist with the recovery. However, as I mentioned before, communication was out in the city, so responders could not be called in. And due to evacuations, possibly we could not locate them. Damage was so extensive across campus that the university called in Belfor, an international disaster recovery firm, to deal with it, as well as the library buildings. The water in both basements had to be pumped out because the water in those basements didn't recede when the floodwaters were pumped out of the city. This is the basement of Howard-Tilton after the water was drained. The water line is clearly visible, and that's what this is, okay? So everything below it's underwater. It's clearly visible thanks to the muck that was in the water. The water line is 9 feet from the floor. The collections housed in the basement, again, are now soaking wet. All of our music, all of our media, all of our microforms, and government documents. The water in the basement, we discovered later, came up through the elevator shafts. The bottom of the shafts are not sealed, they're dirt. And as the water table rose outside the building, the water leached into those water shafts and into the basement. Once the water was pumped out, again, you can see our water line there. Once the water was pumped out of the basements, air tubes were installed to dry and cool the air and moderate the basement climates. With no electricity anywhere in the city, the air tubes and lights were run by generators. Besides the collection, the basement also housed the building's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, as well as the data and telecommunication lines. These two were destroyed in the flooding. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what we faced: the damaged collections, the basement conditions. This picture is from the government documents area. As I said, August is hot and humid in New Orleans, and I chose this picture because I wanted you to note the mold on top of the books, right through here. Yeah. Note the date on the picture, which is up here, right here, August 22nd, 2005. This is nearly a month after Katrina. Due to New Orleans' subtropic climate, which makes it damp and humid, these conditions, most of the materials in Howard-Tilton and Jones Hall molded before they could be removed. Once the salvage process started, it still took weeks to get the basement collections removed from the building. Oops, wrong thing. Okay. The basement area was a biohazard site, and all the recovery workers wore these suits and masks. Now it is September. It's still hot and humid. There was no air conditioning. This picture is of compact shelving in government documents. This is government documents, media, which is CDs and DVDs. These items, I think, stayed on the shelf after the water was pumped out, probably to bookends and the wall behind them. The heat and the moisture, once the water was pumped out, the heat and the moisture caused those plastic cases to stick together, and again, it kept them on the shelf. Water and muck got into the cases and destroyed the integrity of the discs inside. So everything in this picture, including the shelving, but not the people, were thrown out. This picture was taken in early October 2005 during a tour of the basement salvage process for library leaders. You'll note that we were wearing masks to protect our lungs. When I use the term salvage at this point in the recovery process, I'm referring to the items selected to be restored. For government documents, the 2004 disaster plan called for saving the congressional hearings as the only item to be salvaged. Congressional hearings are printing of the hearing by the United States Congress. Eric Wedig, the government documents librarian who was on site during the salvage, identified the location of the hearings for Belfor, that disaster recovery firm. A few other volumes and shelves above the waterline were also salvaged. The rest of the collection, as well as its paper shelf list, was tossed out. I'd like to point out here to you that Eric lost his home in the flooding, but he was there for the library to help with the salvage. I offer you this picture of the microfilm cabinets because water stayed in those cabinets after the water was actually pumped out of the basement. And this was only discovered when the first drawer was open. Therefore, the film stewed in that water longer than we had expected. Eric also oversaw the microfilm collections, and he was able to identify rare microfilm that needed to be salvaged. A collection map would have been ideal, but our disaster plan did not include collections maps. Instead, we relied on Eric's institutional memory to find the items. Microforms in the 2004 plan was considered a second priority for salvaging. Second priority was defined as salvage if time permits. The vast microforms collection contained major microform sets and primary documents about New Orleans and the southern U.S. It also included unique microfilms related to the Latin American Library, which is one of the top 5 libraries for Latin America in the U.S. Only the rarest titles were selected for salvage. Everything else was thrown out because most of it could be replaced. This is what the inside of the music library looked like after the water was pumped out. Books that weren't packed tightly on the shelf floated off the water and they fell to the floor. The weight of the saturated books caused some of the shelves to collapse. Books on the floor, all those books, would not be salvaged. And you'll note the water expands paper and books when they get wet. There's an arc right here of a collection that had expanded. We also, the music staff pulled books from the bottom shelves and placed them on the upper shelves before they left, just in case of flooding. And of course, for this disaster, it didn't really matter. For the music library, the 2004 disaster plan called for first priority salvage of the reference materials and the scores. However, everything on a shelf was salvaged because the first responders knew that these materials would be needed when classes resumed in January. So about 70% of the print collection was saved and sent for restoration. The non-print items were not salvaged. There were also other print materials kept in storage areas in the basement. These materials were art books, gifts, and the cataloging backlog. Or do I have any catalogers in the room? The 2004 plan did not provide a priority for salvage of these materials. The first responders, though, considered these items valuable to so everything here was salvaged. The books were on compact shelving, and this type of shelving kept the books from falling into the water. Because there was no inventory of these materials, I can't tell you how many volumes were there. Not only were the collections damaged, but also the staff work areas. This is a staff member's desk in microforms after the water was gone and salvage was underway. Okay, moving now to Jones Hall, which also had a basement. The building is on slightly raised ground. It took on 4 feet of water in the basement. Special collections use this basement to store unprocessed collections and other archival materials. This picture shows the water line along the shelves. During the salvage period, there was no electricity in this building either. After the water was pumped out, the wet materials continued to drip, creating puddles on the floor. So these are puddles from the materials as they dripped. This is a picture of the bound Louisiana rare newspapers. Note the mold above the water line. And then there's no line here on the volumes that were underwater. So mold is our enemy. Time is our enemy. When this picture was taken, the water had just been removed. The 2004 plan did not address salvage priorities for special collections in Jones Hall. The first responder for this collection, Bill Maneri, Assistant Dean for Special Collections, worked with Balfour to identify the items of value. So the materials salvaged is what you would expect in a special collections: historical manuscripts, film reels, magnetic audio tapes, recordings, newspapers, posters, prints, photographs, slides, ledgers, diaries, scrapbooks, etc., things you'd normally find there. And again, we had to rely on an institutional memory to identify and remove those items of value. With the assistance of Balfour, the recovery disaster experts, wet items were pulled from the shelves, placed in bags and boxes, and frozen freezer tractor trailers. The materials were transported from New Orleans to Balfour's headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, and that's about 8-9 hours from where we are in New Orleans. There, the workers treated the materials according to their state-of-the-art process, which consisted of thawing the materials, treating them with gamma radiation to destroy the mold, painstakingly washing the materials by hand, and then drying them. The microfilm, however, was handled by a subcontractor for Balfour. Most of the film had various stages of vinegar syndrome before the flood, and so the restoration process made it even more fragile, and it caused the film to break. But we didn't know this. We discovered later, much to our chagrin, that the film breaks had been stapled together, so when we placed it on the reader, it scratched the glass plate. So nothing ever goes smoothly. Balfour created box-level inventories, giving us our first inkling of what had been salvaged in each location. From the inventories, we learned that we saved more than 300,000 print volumes, 18,000 reels of microfilm, and 629,711 archival items. Most of the print volumes are going to be from the storage areas and from music. Balfour returned all items to us, no matter what the condition was, with the totally blocked books and other heavily damaged items boxed together so that we could see their state. Most of the archival artifacts like photos, slides, reel-to-reel tapes, and such were not recovered. So I'd like to just cut away here briefly and share with you the personal side of the storm and its effect on the library staff. Tulane is our livelihood. The basements are cleaned out, the collections are gone, and Tulane is closed for the rest of the fall semester. So it was closed from when the storm hit in August until December. The city is not inhabitable. Homes, businesses, and schools are in ruin. There are no utilities, there are no services, communication is still a problem. People are scattered throughout the U.S., and many of the university employees had lost their homes due to the flooding so that they had nowhere to live if and when they returned to New Orleans. This map of the United States shows where some of the library staff relocated immediately after Katrina. Here's New Orleans, the blue star, and these are the various states. We have New England, this is New England, this is Washington State. We had a lot of people in Texas, we had people in Florida, but they weren't in New Orleans. Unfortunately, not all the library staff could or would return when Tulane reopened for classes in January of 2006, 5 months after the storm. By December 15th, Tulane employees had been, most Tulane employees had been called back to work, including the Jones Hall staff, but not the Howard-Tilton Memorial Library employees. Howard-Tilton, in December of 15, still had no electricity, no data lines, and no ventilation system. This is what we had for a ventilation system. A temporary system was built on the back of the library, and air was funneled into the building through plastic tubes. These are the tubes we had. They were 8 tubes per floor. This system was used, and I kid you not, until August of 2015. We had tubes like this running through the building for 10 years, and we had no air conditioning and no heat, although the tubes brought in cool air. New Orleans does get cold enough to require heating in buildings, especially in January, so it would get quite cold. This system did not have thermostats. The only control for it was on and off. In January 26, when we did return to work, the building's electricity came from generators, and there was still no network and no telephone service. The elevators didn't work because of the generators. So it's difficult to move materials between 4 floors without an elevator. And the employees who worked in music or government documents or microforms did not have desks or collections to oversee. Technical services, we adopted a couple of those people into our office space. At this point, the disaster plan stops. The collections have been salvaged, the basement has been cleared out and cleaned, and this is what the basement looked like after Katrina. That's 4,000 square feet of space lost. So as Tulane and Howard-Tilton Library employees, we turned our focus to the recovery and the first day of classes. The first collections needed immediately are going to be music and media. We knew that the recovered materials would not be back in New Orleans by the start of classes, and we needed somewhere to store the materials. The basement is no longer a usable space. I'd like to note here that we did not have the option of closing the library or ceasing services at any time once the campus reopened to students. All right, there's a few issues with rebuilding collections. Faculty needed materials for teaching when classes started on January 17, 2006. In December of 2005, I was placing orders for new and replacement library materials from my home because I live in the 20% of the city that did not flood, so I had electricity and internet. However, ordering was fine. Receiving was a problem. So we had acquiring materials, and we had no mail in New Orleans. The United States Postal Service halted mail into the city right after the storm. So even though I lived in an area that didn't flood, my zip code was a New Orleans zip code, so they wouldn't deliver it to me. United Parcel Services, UPS, distribution office flooded and was inoperable. Mail would continue to be a problem for New Orleans and Tulane for 2 more years. The university, facing financial difficulties post-Katrina, laid off staff. By March of 2006, the library had lost about 1/3 of its employees from those who did not return or those who were laid off, and some left. Several staff were reassigned to technical services to assist with the buying and processing of materials to support the curriculum. We also faced 2 big challenges in rebuilding the collection. One was where to shelve these collections from the basement. The basement, again, I repeat, was off limits for housing anything. And Belfour was ready to return the salvaged and restored materials. There was nowhere for us to store 4,000 boxes on pallets. And who was going to open and process all these items? Because we were still running the day-to-day operations of the library. Government documents were shelved at the off-site facility and retrieved by request. Graduate carrels, study carrels in Howard-Tilton were removed for the microform collection. And Howard-Tilton's staff lounge was converted for the music and media collection service point. Reluctantly, the library gave up student study space to install shelving for the music circulating collection. You'll note here that those white plastic tubes that we saw earlier, they've now been replaced with more flexible black tubing because the white plastic ones kept breaking. So what did we do with the pallets of restored materials? The only space available to us was located in our off-site storage facility that was a converted Coca-Cola distribution warehouse. Okay, so this is Tulane, and this is where the storage facility is. In 2006, the university we were renting only part of the warehouse, so they negotiated to rent the rest of the building for the recovery center. And it is about 2 miles from the uptown campus. That building, this one, came within this much of flooding. So that's what, about 2 centimeters, an inch from flooding. It was the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, who suggested that we outsource the handling of the recovered materials. The United States government paid for the recovery because it was due to negligence on the part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that New Orleans flooded. So after a bid process, the work was awarded to Library Associates, a company out of California. So here we have the pallets. This is just a small number of them. And they were placed all over the warehouse. Any space we could find was filled with pallets. Library Associates began work at the Recovery Center in 2008. So the storm hit in 2005. We didn't start processing the salvaged materials until 2008 by handling the music materials first. When Library Associates started opening the Belfour boxes, the restored materials gave off a horrid smell. And I can only describe that as like a lot of stinky feet. This smell also permeated Howard-Tilton's 3rd floor, where the restored print music was later shelved. And you'll note this worker here on the right wearing her mask. It was so bad, the odor, that some Library Associates staff wore masks while handling the materials. Music students complained that they couldn't use the restored scores because the smell made them nauseous. Only time and fresh air is going to help reduce that odor. The odor actually came from the paper. It was not caused by the recovery process used by Belfour. The final recovery for us was a construction to replace the lost spaces. Again, remember, there's 4,000 square feet in Howard-Tilton and 6,000 square feet in Jones Hall that flooded, and this space could not be used for housing collections. And because the flooding in New Orleans was the result of neglect on the part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government, through FEMA, was responsible for making us whole again. This was FEMA's theme song, if you will. They repeated it often. FEMA worked with Tulane to restore what we lost. The replacement space would be the equal of 2 more floors on top of the Howard-Tilton Memorial Library. So we're talking this is 2 more floors right here. Construction started in August 2013. Howard-Tilton was open and fully operational during those 2 years of construction. So here's my word of advice. I don't recommend working in a building under construction. Take my word for it. However, we had no choice. There was nowhere else on campus we could go. Construction was not restricted to those top 2 floors. It included work on the lower floors where a new sprinkler system was installed. There was asbestos abatement. Both made parts of the collection inaccessible. Emergency stairwells were used when the elevator and the main stairwell were unavailable. So those were just a few of the inconveniences to staff and users. So what we learned. We learned that the written plans are fine, but in the event of disasters like Katrina, circumstances will dictate the response and how it's handled. That said, I believe we're better prepared today to handle the next one. God forbid. Many things we changed in our disaster plan came as a direct result of problems experienced during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. On the left, the 2004 plan covered only the Howard-Tilton Memorial Library, although special collections in Jones Hall, they are a part of the main library. The 2004 plan was issued to everyone with all personal information included, things like phone numbers and addresses. The current plan on the right includes all the libraries on the Uptown campus that report to the library dean and the buildings under the dean's jurisdiction, Howard-Tilton, Jones Hall, and the off-site storage facility. The 2016 plan is issued in 2 parts. There's the Library Emergency Response Team, or LERT. You'll notice we librarians love our acronyms, which includes information that is not included in the staff version or publicly. It has also been edited so that it corresponds with the university's emergency procedures. Our plan is reviewed every April by LERT and updated for things like names, URLs, current library, and university procedures. Copies of the public plan are issued electronically to all staff and posted on the library's website. The LERT copy is issued in paper to LERT members as well as electronically. The idea here is that the plan should be available to all of us no matter where we are. So, a piece of advice. I'm good at that. I'm giving advice. We experienced complete shutdown of cell phones and the internet after Katrina. So you may want to think about where you're going to store your plan, where you want to stash maybe a print copy, your car trunk, your home, or if you own one, an iPad or a tablet. Oops. Okay. Our current plan lists the first responders and all their contact information, office telephone numbers, cell phone numbers, and home phone numbers. It details out what these responders are responsible for, and it includes the command system trees. This means who calls who and when. Each responder has an alternate listed. One of the problems after Katrina was access to the city and to campus and to the buildings. The plan lists out the university contacts of who can provide access to the city and the campus. All first responders have a key to the building and know where to get other keys as needed, like for doors. In the event of another pending hurricane, the first responders can obtain passes to the city and the campus before they evacuate. As I mentioned earlier, the responders relied on institutional memory to identify materials to be salvaged. Having collection priorities is good, but it's better to have the floor maps that show where the materials are going to be located. In the case of locked areas or cabinets, where those keys are. While it is important to identify valuable library materials in the plan, we also have identified important administrative records that should be salvaged. Today, most of our records are digitized and stored in the cloud, but older important records have not been digitized yet. This is kind of small, but it is an example of the phone tree for notifying alert members. Phone numbers for the contacts are actually listed on the previous page in the document. First responders are also issued wallet-sized cards with phone numbers on them, so we keep them in our wallets. In addition, some details were removed from our plan itself and are now appendices. This makes for easier editing and replacement. Some of the appendices are also included in the staff version, like the evacuation contact form. These forms are filled out by all staff and given to their supervisors. The 2004 plan, list of disaster supplies contains supplies like mops and plastic bags, things needed to mop up water and toss out the damaged materials. We went further with that list in the 2006 plan, which includes supplies like absorbent materials such as pigs, hand tools like scissors. It has flashlights, protective gloves and maps, and supplies to handle a triage of wet materials. The preservation librarian is charged with training volunteers in emergency salvage methods, and a list of those names are also included in the plan. Additional information that is only included in the alert document is the office equipment inventory, particularly computers. After Hurricane Katrina, we experienced some loss of computer equipment, so every year we do an inventory and make sure it's been updated. Another appendix contains the instructions for posting emergency notices to the staff. Brief messages will be posted on the library's homepage, but more detailed ones on the library's emergency blog. Today, with social media, we'll be using things like Twitter and Facebook, so a lot of people have those accounts. We also include a list of firms specializing in disaster recovery. In the event of a storm like Hurricane Katrina, the university will already now have a firm on retainer. So to wrap up, here are some of my suggestions based on our experience. Know the plan and have access to the plan. Know what needs to be done. Don't rely on looking it up. Keep it up to date by reviewing it annually or more frequently. Educate and train your first responders, their alternates, and staff. Keep the staff informed and aware of their responsibilities. Rely on your staff to assist, and staff leaders will emerge during an event. Prioritize collections for salvaging. Not everything can be salvaged and probably shouldn't be, but know where these items are and inform staff. Plan for alternative communication methods. Stress to staff it's their responsibility to get in touch with their supervisors and know where to find information. When the internet is available or comes back up, in case it's down, use it for more detailed messages. Today, again, social media as well as blogs are good ways to communicate. You may choose to use several methods to communicate necessary information. Have a name of a disaster recovery firm that's out of your immediate area and experienced in disasters. Belfour was great. Depending on the size of the disaster, you'll need space, lots of space. We were lucky to have space available to us in that Coca-Cola warehouse, and we had looked at some other options, but that one worked out the best. In conclusion, I'd like to show you the Howard-Tilton Memorial Library with the 2 more floors, where construction is done. On the top floor, or 6th floor, are the music and media collection and microforms. Rare books are moved here to occupy that 6,000 square feet included from Jones Hall. Government documents are located on the 5th floor, as is our new ventilation system. We cheered when those tubes came down. The ribbon cutting was done in March of 2016, marking the end of the post-Katrina recovery. And finally, after being empty for the last 10 years, this past summer, the university built classrooms in the Howard-Tilton basement. This presentation would not have been nearly as interesting without the pictures, so I offer you the photo credits from Tulane University's photo archive. The disaster photos were taken by the Associate Dean. I took some of the post-Katrina photos. The Recovery Center is from Library Associates. I'd also like to acknowledge Andy Corrigan, today Associate Dean for the Libraries, for his work documenting the last 10 years of post-Katrina recovery. He and I worked closely together during the recovery period. For more information about our recovery and the construction, see Andy's pages on the library's homepage about collections and his library construction blog. Thank you again for this opportunity to share with you the Tulane experience. I now welcome any questions that you might have. And muchas gracias is about all of the Spanish I know. Thank you. I think the question is, how did we select the things we took out of those collections? Exactly. Yeah, it was basically first responders' decisions of what was to come out. It was quick and fast, so we could get the materials out. They chose things that, like the microforms, which were second priority. But they wanted the films for the Latin American Library because we knew we couldn't replace them. There was no one there for music, so they took everything off the shelf, but left everything that was on the floor. So it really came down to whoever was on site made a decision quickly.
So it was during the process?
Yes, it was during the salvage period. Eric and Andy and Bill were there every day almost during that salvage days.
And right now in the new plan, how do decide the prioritization of material?
The prioritizing of the collections today and on those maps are being done by either the director of the area or those directly responsible for the collections. So since it's a circulating collection, the bibliographers will identify what particularly is important or rare in those collections. And so we take the map, the shelving map, and we mark them. Yeah.
Okay. And another question.
Sure.
In United States is very well known the pre-pocket plan, the pre-pocket material response plan. That is this small paper with all the information that you can...
The wallet-sized card
Yes,
that we carry,
exactly.
yes.
Do you use it?
Yes, in the case of an emergency. And I have to say, let me share with you, I had this in the presentation, but I took it out. One of the problems with the construction was we had numerous water events. So yeah, they came in handy in getting touched because the first one that happened was at 1 a.m. We were experiencing very heavy rains in the city. And the construction workers had been taking off the roof so they could put the steel posts in for the new floors. So they were drilling holes, and it was a subcontractor, and they weren't supposed to drill all the way through the ceiling. They were just supposed to drill so far down. Well, they drilled through the ceiling, and it was right over the D's, if you're Library of Congress, D's, and it damaged through water about 4,000 books. So with the card, who was called? Yeah. So we have used them.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hello, Donna.
Hi.
I'm a conservator from two museums here in Bogota, but we have most of all like wood pieces, and we are more concerned about fires. So I really want to know, what do you think about sprinklers?
Yeah.
Because also you have a very, I mean, your material is like, I don't know how do you work with that.
It's not as valuable. What we did is over the special collections, like the Latin American Library, because it's on the 4th floor and it's right below the new HVAC system. And then also in the rare books, we used a system where the pipes will only fill with water if there is a fire. But yeah, it's water is, but you know what? I have to say, recovery from water is easier than recovery from fire. I was asked that question this morning about what do I think is the worst? I think fire is the worst.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Quisiera saber, en términos del patrimonio documental, ¿cuáles fueron las peores pérdidas que tuvo la colección de la biblioteca? De la universidad, lo que no se puede recuperar realmente y que fue lamentable.
Okay. The question for those of you in English was, what are the regrettable things that we lost? And I think it was the special collections, those like reel-to-reel tapes. They were in metal canisters, and the canisters rusted. And then the tapes themselves were, the emulsion went together, so it would have taken a lot of money and a lot of time to recover that stuff. There were groups of pictures in folders, and those pictures stuck together. So I would say that's what we regretted losing. I will share with you that post the recovery period, we feel that a lot of what we saved, we wouldn't have saved today, having gone through it, like the scores, the music scores, the smell that made them unusable, but the paper waved. And I don't know if any of you are musicians and play from some scores, you find it difficult to read those scores if they wave. So we actually removed them and bought new replacements. Yeah. And the microfilm, I don't know where the communication problem was exactly with that. The company felt that they were just saving it for us for preservation, that we weren't going to use them, so that's why they stapled them together. So, yeah. Thank you. Anyone else?
Buenas tardes. Aclaro que no tengo el más mínimo conocimiento en esta materia, simplemente me surge una inquietud. ¿Hay alguna posibilidad, han pensado ustedes en alguna posibilidad de que en ciudades como Nueva Orleans, con los riesgos altos de nuevas inundaciones o de otros eventos naturales, pudieran adelantarse en el tiempo colecciones de respaldo virtual, digital, que se almacenen en otras instituciones para proteger ese patrimonio?
What we're doing is digitizing. It's slow. We have to ask for money or get grants in order to do that. The other thing that we're doing is we're moving, I don't know if you're familiar with a company in the U.S. called Iron Mountain, and we're thinking about putting our low use or collections in the mountain, having someone else take care of it for us, but moving those most fragile items that we can outside the city. But digitization is very much on our radar. Yeah, thank you.